Hey, welcome back to Nosco Unpacked, the channel all about flexible packaging. I'm Steve Kruger, product manager here at Nosco for flexible packaging, and today we're going to talk about barriers within flexible packaging materials. Alright, so in order for us to start talking about barriers and flexible materials, we really got to talk to somebody who's a little bit more knowledgeable about these things than I am. So we're going to go on over to our lab and talk with my buddy Steve so that he can explain a little bit more about barriers. Just a warning though, he's a little bit odd, so be prepared. Hey Steve. Hey Steve.
Hey Steven, how are you this morning? Sorry, I was just warming up the breakfast. So, how can I help you?
Hey Steve, sorry for ruining your breakfast. Let me go get a step stool.
Good thinking.
Much better. I hope your breakfast was good.
It was really good.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Yeah, so Steve, I brought some friends along with me because I wanted to talk a little bit about flexible packaging materials and barriers. So, when is a barrier really needed in a flex pack pouch?
Stephen, that's an excellent question. There's really two areas where you need to really concern yourself with a barrier. The first one is if you have a product that you're packaging where it's sensitive to the outside environment, moisture, oxygen, light, then you need something to protect that product from being exposed to those elements during the shelf life of that product. The other condition where you need a barrier is where you want to protect the contents from passing moisture or odor or other things like that out of the package and confront a consumer or a user. One great example is that is if you have like dog food or dog treats, you don't want your dog discovering those before you want to give them to them. You know what I mean? Or you're going to have a mess all over the house.
You're speaking from personal experience.
I am. It's a disaster.
Okay, so Steve, I heard you say something about like moisture and oxygen. So what exactly do those mean, or are we referring to?
There's really four major types of barriers that we're concerned with flexible packaging. Like you said, the first one being moisture. We want to make sure that there's no moisture that can penetrate into the package and onto the product and cause the product to change. Like think of potato chips. If you get more moisture in potato chips than intended, you have a stale potato chip. So we want to have a moisture barrier to prevent that moisture from either going into the package and changing the product, or leaving the package and changing the product and reducing the moisture content. Okay. The next one is really important, that's oxygen barrier. Oxygen is obviously great for us to breathe. 21% of air is oxygen. We have to have it to live, right? But we don't necessarily need it in the package. So there are some products we know can be damaged or can change over time with exposure to oxygen. So that's a barrier that we want to be able to offer in our flexible packaging films to be able to prevent that oxygen from damaging the product inside.
Okay, understood.
The third one, which a lot of people don't think about, is light, right? Because if that package is sitting in a store and the light is on it, or it's sitting next to a window, light can be very damaging to products as well. It can change the color, it can start to break down the product. So there's some situations where we need to protect that contents from light. There's other situations where you want that pouch to be clear so you can actually visualize the product inside. So both are important, but light is an important thing to be able to offer a barrier for.
So like visualizing my pet treats, I want to see the pet treats, right? But we don't want the dog to smell the pet treats.
We don't need the dog smelling them. Yeah. So the last one is interesting enough, is odor. That's where we want to make sure, like the dogs, they don't smell that and come running in and ripping the package open before you want to give them their treat. The other thing is sometimes odors of products aren't the most pleasant when they're in their concentrated forms, but are much more palatable when you dilute them as intended, or you modify them or mix them with other products. So those are the two areas where odor barrier is very important.
Understood. Thank you for the explanation, Steve.
My pleasure.
All right, Steve, I heard you mention oxygen, moisture, light, odor, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, what does that mean to me? I don't understand how you're really gauging whether you've got too much light, too much moisture. I'm not really sure how that all works.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
This gets a little technical, so I apologize. But
Oh.
we do have ways of measuring how much of that material that we want to prevent from penetrating in the package. So for each one of those, the oxygen, the moisture, the light, and the odor, we have ways of measuring how much barrier there really is. For oxygen, for instance, we have something called OTR, oxygen transmission rate. And what that means is they can measure for a certain area of film, they measure the number of cc's of oxygen that can pass through that film, that's given area of film, it's 100 square inches, over a 24-hour period.
Okay.
And so they measure that in cc's of oxygen, and then they can express that. So a film that has a very low oxygen barrier may have 9 or 10 or 11 cc's of oxygen, OTR, oxygen transmission rate. Somewhere, a film that's protecting the product from oxygen is going to have a very low oxygen transmission rate, less than 0.01 cc's per 24 hours.
And that's going to be something critical that's super sensitive to oxygen.
Yeah, that's going to prevent almost all the oxygen from getting to that product.
All right.
Okay?
All right.
Does that make sense?
I think I'm getting it.
So for moisture, we have something called MVTR, or moisture or water vapor transmission rate.
Okay.
And so the way that works is they take that same area of film, they expose it to moisture for 24 hours, and they measure the number of grams of water that are able to transition through that film, and that gives us an understanding of how much moisture can either come into the pouch or leave the pouch during its lifetime. So most all of our films that we use have a fairly good moisture transmission rate, or very low moisture transmission rate.
Sure.
But there are some films that are better than others. And when a product is very sensitive to moisture, then those are the ones we're going to recommend.
Okay, so yeah, I'm starting to understand what you're saying. So like for my protein powders that I use, this is something that I would really be concerned with, because I want to protect, my protein powders from getting moisture in there and have good shelf life.
Right, exactly, because that moisture is going to change the properties of that protein powder in some cases, and it's also going to make it very difficult to get it out of the pouch and measure it, because it's going to be clumping and things like that because of the moisture content.
Sure.
Okay?
Understood. Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, thank you.
The third characteristic we talked about was light. And so we want to be able to measure the amount of light that can pass through the film and then be able to affect the contents inside. So the way we do that is we use what's called a transmission densitometer, and that transmission densitometer measures the amount of light that passes through different films. So a clear film is going to have a very low density, 0 or 0.02, where a film that has a foil or metallization is going to have a much higher light barrier and much higher density, transmission density.
Okay, got it.
Sense?
Yeah, that's making sense to me.
Yeah. And the last characteristic that we talked about was odor, and that's more of a subjective kind of measurement. You really can't put a value in it, because odor is really relative to the subject that's actually detecting it. Obviously, a dog is going to be much more sensitive to odor than you and I are going to be, right?
Right.
So, but they're all related to the oxygen transmission rate of that film, because odor is carried on a gas. Obviously, oxygen is a gas, it's 21% of air. More oxygen that can pass through the film is also going to be able to pass that odor through the film.
Sure.
They're very related.
Okay, that makes sense. That really helps me understand that transmission. More importantly, the oxygen transmission that you're talking about to really receive the odor.
Right, exactly. It's going through the going through the pouch, and you're able to detect that, or Rover's able to detect it. You know what I'm saying?
Hey Steve, thanks so much for all that great information. Unfortunately, we're out of time this episode, but do you think you could join me next episode to talk a little bit more about barrier?
I'd love to.
Excellent. Viewers, thanks for joining us this time and learning about barriers. Please join us again next segment to continue the conversation. Go ahead and like and subscribe. This is Nosco's Unpacked, flexible packaging made easy. See you next time.